When I first saw Kwaidan, I wasn't exactly sure what I was looking at. Mostly because I was on the Japanese eShop. But semantics. This game looks like something I should absolutely love. It's got that old crusty PS2 horror game look to it, and it doesn't feel phoned in like a lot of retro-styled games tend to. Hell, when I first saw the listing, I thought this might have been another niche Japan-only title that ended up getting a Switch port. There's certainly not a shortage of those, and most of them tend to be pretty okay, or at least their importance in history is. Sort of. Turns out Kwaidan is actually a PC game that released back in February on Steam and only recently made its way onto PS4 and Switch. It's a one-person job, and I'm pretty impressed by that alone when it comes to the visual and auditory feel of it. A lot of my favorite horror games come from that early aughts PS2 Dreamcast-era, and Kwaidan replicated that time period just well enough that it looks bad without actually looking bad. I think it captures the visual style it's aiming for, even if moving mouths outside of pre-rendered cutscenes hadn't really been figured out by then, but I'm just splitting hairs at this point. The enemy designs are pretty interesting, or at least a few of them are. I'm a sucker for Japanese yokai, so my personal bias might be showing a bit. There is an option for cel-shaded graphics that are supposed to look more modern, but I couldn't really tell the difference that much. The textures on the characters look a bit smoother, but visually you have the same tone and colors. Also, I don't think the environments really change that much, so it's really not that big of a jump. There's more than just looks tied to the graphical choice though, as the older PS2 era settings uses tank controls and the cel-shaded option has a somewhat more modern control. And by that I mean when you tap left or right on the joystick, your character actually walks in those directions instead of just spinning around. The game was clearly designed with the tank controls in mind though. Holding back causes your character to slowly walk backwards, but is also the command you need to block, and blocking is really important because health is far and few between compared to the amount of monster encounters the game has. In the modern controls, holding back causes your character to turn around, and if you want to block, you have to hold back on the D-pad to slowly go backwards, or hit the left trigger button. But the most egregious part of this game's controls has to be its interface. The game tried to mix fixed camera survival horror with point-and-click adventure, and it does not work out well. Instead of having a pause menu with items, the game loads your inventory off to the right side, and you have to use the right control stick to move a mouse cursor around to select everything. Items, objects of interest in the world, even doors won't open unless you hover over them first. Oftentimes it breaks up the flow of the game because you'll have to stop moving to properly aim the cursor. I don't really understand why this style of control was chosen over just having a button that examines whatever the character is standing in front of. There's one convoluted puzzle a bit later into the game that makes use of a weird first-person mode that kind of uses the cursor, but everything else could have been done with a simpler control scheme. Combat mixes between 3 different weapons, each one hits at a different height. The Magatama hits low to the ground, the Naginata hits mid, and the Cleansing Mirror hits above you. Weapons really don't serve a purpose outside of combat, and combat itself is pretty agonizing. I already talked about how awkward it can be to block, but dealing with certain creatures can be frustrating too. The second boss of the game is one of my least favorite encounters. It's essentially a rock that just continually rams into the player, and its only weak point is its face. I'm sure patience and a good mastery of the controls helps, but the fight itself is neither fun nor engaging. Lo and behold, this same creature killed my enthusiasm to finish the game when it showed up again in a boss rush before the final battle. It took me several healing items to clear it the first time, and no way in hell I was going to drag myself back through that encounter again. Also, there's a puzzle that requires knowledge of Japanese kanji. I imagine for most people this will be the inevitable stopping point. It's really bad design to not localize this aspect or program in some kind of extra note or information to make it a bit easier. Hell, a file system is already a common aspect in most horror games like this, and Kwaidan couldn't even offer that. There's so much missed potential and basic design concepts that just seem to be left out, which I think is part of the problem with the solo developed title. Maybe this was just something the designer had overlooked or didn't think about. I really hate that I don't like this game. The music is really good. The graphics are terrible in that early PS2 kind of way, which seems to be what the game was going for. It sucks that this game does so well on its audio and visual style, only to faceplant because of its controls and a lack of foresight on a key puzzle. If Kwaidan ever drops below $5, then go for it. If you have the patience to put up with old and busted survival horror, you'll get a cute 2 to 3 hour experience. Otherwise, just go play Onimusha instead if you want to fight demons in medieval Japan.